Here. Good morning and welcome as we continue the series of To Be or Not to Be the Church. Um, we build on last week's scripture. Last week we were talking about discipleship, and we didn't really dive too deeply into what it means to be a disciple. This week's passage from the Gospel of Luke touches that or points us in that direction here. So we're from the Luke, the 9th chapter of the Gospel of Luke, and we're picking up on the 23rd verse. Jesus said to everyone, "All who want to come after me must say no to themselves, take up their crosses daily, and follow me. All who want to save their lives will lose them, but all who lose their lives because of me will save them. What advantage do people have if they gain the whole world for themselves, yet perish or lose their lives? Whoever is ashamed of me and my words, the human one will be ashamed of that person when he comes in his glory and in the glory of the Father and of the holy angels." I'm going to go on and add verse 27 here. "I assure you that some standing here won't die before they see God's kingdom." Now, this is a passage that, taken by itself, is rather difficult to get inside of, at least for my mind. And I find some help by putting it in the context of where Luke has placed it in his gospel. Luke, as you may or may not know, talks about getting or compiling an orderly account of the life and ministry of Christ and the Acts of the Apostles. At the time that Luke wrote this, many of the participants were still alive, and it is presumable that he had the opportunity to talk to many of them. At the beginning of the Gospel of Luke, where it tells the birth story, in that context of being able to talk to the people, I have come to think there's no real support for thinking this way, other than that Luke said he was having compiling an orderly account, that birth narrative came from Mary, that her remembering of the birth of Christ, that Luke was able to talk to her about that. Like I said, there's no support from that other than that he says he was compiling an orderly account, and that these people were alive and that he could have talked to them at this time. But placing this in the context of where Luke has placed it, the part that comes before it is where Jesus asks the disciples first, "Who do the people say that I am?" and then turns it directly to them, "And who do you say that I am?" Seeking for their understanding of Christ and his relationship with God. And then we have Christ teaching this to the disciples. And then what comes after is the transformation, where Jesus takes 3 of the disciples up onto the mountain and is transformed before them. And the disciples have that time there. So in that context, you can see, or start to see, I think, that Jesus is starting to prepare his disciples for what's coming afterwards. He tells them that straight out, that he's going to die and that this is all going to be your ministry at some point down the road here. And these are some things that you need to do. So this passage today, where he talks about dying to self and taking up your cross, is in a way looking at what it means to be a disciple. Now, one of the thoughts that I ran into or came across when I was looking for some help with this in commentaries online is that there's a difference between salvation and discipleship. Salvation is being justified by our faith, put into a right relationship with God. Discipleship is that part of becoming like Christ. So you can be saved and still not be a disciple, in other words, if that makes any sense. And unfortunately, in that context of looking at it that way, I think our churches are filled up with saved people and very few disciples. And I say that because of the lack of fruit for the church. I may be stepping way out on a limb, about to break off there, but that's just the way that comes together in my mind. So Jesus is telling his disciples here that they must take up their cross daily and follow me. Do you think that means that taking up your cross of dying or being willing to die?
You're going to die whether you're willing to or not.
That's true.
I think it means that you do whatever it is God puts in front of you to do. And I don't know how you figure out what that is sometimes, but that's what I think, that it doesn't have anything to do with being willing to die. It has to do with being willing to live for Jesus.
I think that's pointed in the direction there. Here again, I as I look at this, I get help from things that the Apostle Paul has written in his writing. And he talks about dying to self and living his life for God. I should have looked that up because I'm doing a terrible job of paraphrasing that there. But that for Paul, the symbol of the cross is denying self. That when he says when Jesus says here taking up the cross, the way Paul sees that is taking up the life of Christ on a daily basis, which means putting your own life aside. Some of the commentaries went deeply into this, what it means to die to self. It doesn't mean lose your identity, but it does mean the things that motivate you. Well, let's just talk about material things. Gaining wealth, material possessions. If that's what drives your life, then I think that comes into play, that when he says you lose your life. And the thought that comes to my mind is how wealth doesn't seem to be a harbinger of happiness or contentment, being contented with one's life. With wealth seems to often come a desire and a drive for more wealth. And I think that goes along with material things. And so taking up the cross is to take up a focus of your life, not a personal focus, but a focus that Christ has given to us. And I think that follows along with where this passage begins, where Luke has placed it, when Jesus asked the disciples, "Who do you say that I am? Who do the people say that I am?" You are the Christ, is what Peter says, and he tells him that that didn't come to you out of your own intellect, that came to you by the Spirit telling you or allowing you to see that. Verse 27 that I added onto it, don't want to let that slide by. I assure you that some standing here won't die before they see God's kingdom. The prevalent teaching down through the ages of the church, the first understanding of how this would come into play is that Jesus was coming again. And for the early church and disciples, that was within their lifetime that they expected this to happen. And that created or instilled an urgency into their lives, into the way that they conducted the ministry, that they didn't have all the time in the world. from hindsight, as we look at this today, it seems that what Jesus was telling them is that there will be glimpses of the kingdom. There will be times that the kingdom will come near, as Jesus has said, that the church will get it right. And unfortunately, those are very brief periods of time in the overall scope of things. But he was telling them, I think here, that they're going to see some glimpses of God's kingdom, of what God created the world to be in their lifetime. And I also think that he's implying here that it will be because of the life of the disciples. This is a group that he's teaching at this time, that as they're able to deny self and take up the cross daily, as they're able to do that and allow their lives to be molded into that image of Christ that we talked about last week, then there will be glimpses of this kingdom here on earth. This is heavy stuff, to think about this and to try to incorporate it into your lives.
I think on this, can do it like educational system. The followers would be like the people that's going to school. Disciples be the ones that's the graduates. They're getting more concentrated learning under a specific teacher. And teachers in the classroom, like Susan would do, first thing she would do is question the kids, find out where they are. He was questioning them, find out where the disciples are in their concept of what his life was like, what God was like. So he would know, okay, I need to focus a little bit further down the road so they'll understand what's going on. And unless I can get them to focus a little further, they're not ready to go out and make disciples of other people. Mm-hmm. But the more they learn, the more graduate student they would be, or a doctorate if they go further down the line.
I'm glad you added that part.
They're focused, so much that they become the Pope of the church or leaders of the church. But he was testing them, find out what their concept of him was, so that he would know how to shift his teaching to make them come back to the track that he wanted them to be on.
I'm glad you added the part about graduate school there, that just graduating is not an end in itself, that it's
a learning process,
right.
Continue learning. That's what he wanted to focus on, is continually learning about God.
One of my favorite quotes of John Wesley, Methodist pastors have an ongoing education, a continuing education requirement. And every year, as we do the charge conference reports, pastors are accountable for their continuing education. And you're expected to acquire 8 credits, and there's an hour equivalent of learning that equates to a credit there. I think it's 10 hours equals 1 credit. But you're expected to acquire 8 credits of continuing education every 4 years. You can bundle it up and do it all at one time, or you can spread it out as most people do over the 4 years. But one of Wesley's early preachers complained to Wesley about this requirement for continuing education. The way the quote goes is that he tells Wesley that he's not a man of the book. And Wesley's reply to this preacher is that you will either become a man of the book, or you will again take up your trowel, meaning that of a mason, a stonemason, of taking up the trowel to go back to his labors rather than being a preacher. So Wesley didn't cut any slack there.
In anything.
No. The application of continuing education, there's considerable room there to achieve that in many, many different forms. I never had any problems with that acquiring. I always had more than 8 credits. But there are some who resisted and refused to do that, and some take up their trowel again as a result of that. I've gotten a little bit away from the topic here, but discipleship is something that we struggle with, and rightly so, because it is something that is not natural to us. We have to give up control of our lives. We have to give up. I can't think of any other way to say it, of being in control, and allow God and the Holy Spirit to be in control of our lives and molding and shaping our lives into that image of Christ that we talked about last week. Any other comments as we wrap this up? I think I should have let you teach this one, Roger. You
Well,
seem
I
to
know
have a
what
good
Susan
grasp
is
on
with
it.
the school system. She has to get recertified every so many
Yeah.
credits, every so many years, keep her teaching certificate in force in order to have a teaching job in the school system. So the school system requires a continuing education course as well as pastors or any other, even the,
It's also at work
spiritual
in
advisors.
the military.
Yeah.
I was looking through, I found out that Home Depot also offers a discount for veterans. But unlike Lowe's, they require an actual document to show that you were a veteran. Lowe's just ask you to input the time you served, and then they'll put you in their system. But Home Depot wanted the actual document. And I was looking through to find the form that they wanted, and was reminded that in the military, education, continuing education, was a requirement. Whatever grade that you were in, you started at that point working to the next grade of taking classes and studies. Most of it was online at that time, but even there was that requirement.
plus the time and grade, unless it was battlefield promotion, which
Yeah.
that would happen, instantaneously. But you had to have so many months or weeks in that grade before you'd be considered for the next grade.
So salvation points us in the direction of discipleship, and discipleship becomes, becoming a disciple becomes a lifelong process. But it is in that lifelong process that we begin to impact other lives and making disciples. Well, we'll see where Pastor Dawn goes with this. I noticed that last week, as I was focusing on discipleship, her focus was on witness. So I'm interested to see how she opens this passage up for us later on today. Hope you'll be joining us for worship, either online or in person. And thank you all for being at the table and online. And God bless you.